Civil Rights Movement by David, Henry, Ali, Ahud, and Esmeralda. Question 1. The Brown versus Board of Education was a Supreme Court case that ended segregation in public schools. Brown versus Board of Education was a combination of 5 cases: Brown itself, Briggs versus Elliott, Davis versus County School, Board of Prince Edward County, Gebhardt versus Belton, and Bowling versus Sharpie. One case that was filled to the court was by parents of 20 children. The most famous parent that was involved was Oliver Brown, whose daughter had to walk to school every day. The school she was segregated to go to was 1.6 miles away, while a public white school was 7 blocks away. Brown consistently tried to enroll her in different schools, but none would allow her. Because these 5 cases brought up the issue of racial discrimination, the Supreme Court decided to desegregate public schools. This decision, however, caused even more racial tension. Question number 2. The SCLC is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which is the African American Civil Rights Organization. This is closely related to the first president of Dr. Martin Luther King because he was so involved in African civil rights. This conference was supported by black churches. The event that launched this conference was the Montgomery bus boycott. This group was different from other organizations, however. They worked with people associated with the Montgomery Improvement Association and others like it. Question number 3. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. He was the middle child of Michael King Sr. and Alberta Williams King. King attended segregated public schools at the age of 15, was admitted to Morehouse College, where he studied medicine and law. After graduating in 1948, King entered Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, where he earned a Bachelor of Divinity degree, won a prestigious fellowship, and was elected president of his predominantly white senior class. King then enrolled in a graduate program at Boston University and earned a doctorate in systematic theology 2 years later. While in Boston, he met Coretta Scott. They got married in 1953 and settled in Montgomery, Alabama, where King became a pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. They ended up having 4 children. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a Montgomery bus and was arrested. Activists coordinated a bus boycott and would continue for 381 days. They chose Martin Luther King Jr. as the protest leader and officially spokesman. He had also become a target for white supremacists who firebombed his family home that January. Martin Luther King Jr. worked with a number of civil rights and religious groups to organize the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, a peaceful political rally. The march culminated in King's most famous address, known as I Have a Dream speech. On the evening of April 4, 1968, King was fatally shot while standing on the balcony of a motel in Memphis, where he had traveled to support a sanitation workers' strike. James Earl Ray pleaded guilty to the murder and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. Question number 4. On February 4th, 1913, Rosa Louise McCauley was born in Tuckagee, Alabama. Her parents were James McCauley and Leona Edwards. Her parents separated and her mother took her and her brother and moved to Pines Level. Rosa was homeschooled by her mother. However, when she turned 11, she attended a public school. She attended the Industrial School for Girls in Montgomery. She also went to high school at the Alabama State Teachers College. She left at 16 because she needed to take care of her dying grandmother. In 1932, at 19, she married Raymond Parks. He was a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. On Thursday, December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was going home from work at the Montgomery Fair department store by bus. The buses were segregated. The front of a Montgomery bus was reserved for white citizens and the seats behind them for black citizens. However, the bus drivers had the authority to ask a black person to give up the seat for a white rider. A white man had no seat because all the seats in the designated white section were taken. The driver told the riders in the 4 seats of the first row of the colored section to stand. The 3 others got up, but Parks did not. This caused Rosa Parks to get arrested. Question number 5. In September 1957, school had started in Little Rock, Arkansas, in Central High School in Little Rock. However, 9 black students were chosen to enroll in Central High School, which was an all-white high school. This happened because of the ruling of the Supreme Court announcing that segregated schools are considered unconstitutional. These 9 people were known as the Little Rock Nine. The first day of school, the governor of Arkansas had to put the state National Guards outside of the school, forbidding the Little Rock Nine to enter the school. President Eisenhower was not content with this, so he sent federal troops to escort the Little Rock Nine into the school. This experience was not easy for them, as many have talked about the horrendous things that happened to them during their stay. Melba Patillo Beals wrote about her experience as one of the 9 and wrote a book named Warriors Don't Cry. Question number 6. Orville Eugene Faubus was born on January 7, 1910 in Madison County, Arkansas. He was provided with an early education in politics by his father. Faubus served 6 consecutive terms as governor from 1955 to 1967. During his term in 1957, Faubus became well known when he used the National Guard to keep 9 African American students from entering the all-white Central High in Little Rock, Arkansas. President Eisenhower later responded by moving the Arkansas National Guard and placing the 101st Airborne to guard the Little Rock Nine. Through the National Guard later returned to protect the 9 students. To retaliate, Faubus closed Little Rock schools for the year 1958 to 1959, which is referred to as the lost year. Orville Faubus continued to run for governor, but decided not to for his 7th consecutive term. He died on December 4th, 1994, from prostate cancer. Question number 7. The Montgomery bus boycotts took place on December 5th, 1955, 4 days after Rosa Parks denied giving her seat to a white male and later arrested. The boycott was organized and spread by black ministers and churches on the 4th, including one by the name of Martin Luther King Jr., who told his community to perform peaceful protests, with a large community leaving buses empty instead. Walking or carpooling, this greatly affected bus profits. On June 5th, 1956, the Montgomery Federal Court ruled that the segregation of buses was unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. Buses were finally integrated on December 21st, 1956, to which the boycotts ended after 381 days. Question number 8. Jackie Robinson was born on January 31st, 1991, and passed away on October 24th, 1972. Jackie Robinson was an American Major League Baseball player who played second baseman. Robinson became the first African American to play in the major league in the modern era. Robinson broke the baseball color line when the Brooklyn Dodgers started him at first base on April 15, 1947. When the Brooklyn Dodgers played Jackie Robinson, it had resulted in ending the racial segregation that had segregated black players to the African American League since the 1880s. By being the first African American to play in the MLB, it gave a lot of people hope. People would believe that anything is possible since they saw that Robinson could do it. Later in his years, Robinson was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962.
Part 2. Question 1. John F. Kennedy was born on May 29, 1917, in Brookline, Massachusetts. After serving in the Navy, Kennedy went back to Boston to run for Congress in 1946 and won at the age of 29. He also won during the elections for the House of Representatives in 1948 and 1950, along with the Senate in 1952. January 1961, Kennedy became the 35th President of the United States. Kennedy gave minimum support to the civil rights reforms because of the Southern Democrats in Congress who opposed these reforms. After hearing MLK's I Have a Dream speech, Kennedy sent a civil rights bill to Congress. This act, which was passed on July 2, 1964, prohibited discrimination in public places, integrated schools and public facilities, and also made employment discrimination illegal. On November 22nd, 1963, Kennedy and his wife rode down a cheering crowd in Dallas, Texas, where Kennedy was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald. Question 2. Freedom Rides were groups of activists who rode integrated buses into the Deep South to integrate whites and blacks. These attendants would try different tactics to integrate the two races. One common tactic was for blacks to use the white restrooms and waiting areas. Since the South was so racist, it caused people to retaliate. For example, the first Freedom Bus was firebombed. Question 3. In the spring of 1963, civil rights activists created one of the most influential campaigns of the civil rights movement. Birmingham is considered one of the most violent and racist cities in the South. During these campaigns, protesters would perform sit-ins, marches on City Hall, and boycotts on downtown merchants to protest segregation laws in the city. With these peaceful protests, the city decided to act violently to stop these protests using water hoses and dogs. These protests, however, became successful in May of 1963 when officials agreed to remove the white and black only signs from bathroom and drinking fountains. Number 4. CORE stands for Congress of Racial Equality and was founded in 1942. In the 1960s, they worked with many people to take on initiatives. They took on the Freedom Rides aimed at desegregating public facilities, the March on Washington, and the Summer Voting Registration Project. It based its ideas on ending racism and segregation peacefully so that they would not be seen as out of control. Question number 5. On August 28, 1963, the leader of civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, made his I Have a Dream speech. On this day, 250,000 whites and blacks gathered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. During this time, MLK continued to construct protests, boycotts, and marches to convince the American people that blacks were to be treated equally. Question number 6. The March on Washington took place on August 28, 1963, and it was for the awareness of jobs and freedoms for blacks. This was a key moment in civil rights history because later on during the march, MLK Jr. gave his famous speech titled I Have a Dream, which truly helped raise awareness towards civil rights and what the African Americans are really asking for. Question number 7. The Freedom Summer, also known as the Mississippi Summer Project. The Freedom Summer was an initiative from CORE, which was an effort to expand black voting in Mississippi. While this occurred in 1964, many out-of-state white people and many black people decided to try to help increase the number of black people voting in Mississippi, but realized this was no easy task as the KKK, many locals, and the police did not approve of this, and many were beaten and killed for trying to do this. The Mississippi Project did establish 50 freedom schools to carry on community organizing, but it managed to register only 1,200 Afro-Americans. Number 8. The SNCC stands for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They formed to give younger African Americans more voice in the civil rights movement. Most of the people in the organization were young students that did not have responsibilities. It emerged from a student meeting organized by Ella Baker held at Shaw University in April 1960. SNCC grew into a large organization with many supporters in the North, who helped raise funds to support SNCC's work in the South. SNCC played a major role in the sit-ins and freedom rides, a leading role in the 1963 March on Washington, Mississippi Freedom Summer, and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party over the next few years. Question number 9. Malcolm X was born on May 19, 1925. He was an American Muslim minister and a human rights activist. At the age of 20, he went to prison for larceny and breaking and entering. While in prison, Malcolm X became a member of the Nation of Islam, and after his parole in 1952, quickly rose to become one of the organization's most influential leaders. In his autobiography, Malcolm X wrote some of the nation's social achievements made while he was a member. He also promoted black supremacy, advocated the separation of black and white Americans, and rejected the civil rights movement for the emphasis on integration. Number 10. The Voting Rights Act is a law that was passed at the time of the civil rights movement. The act had eliminated various devices such as literacy tests that had traditionally been used to restrict voting by black people. Number 11. Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson Baines, or LBJ for short, was a Democratic Party political leader of the 20th century who was president from 1963 to 1969. Johnson had risen to power in the Senate. He was elected vice president in 1960, running with John F. Kennedy, and became president after Kennedy was assassinated. Question number 12. Civil Rights Act of 1964 was an act that ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This act is considered one of the crowning legislative achievements of the civil rights movement. It was first proposed by President John F. Kennedy, and the act survived strong opposition from Southern members of Congress and was then signed into law by Kennedy's successor, Lyndon B. Johnson. Part 3, Question 1. The NWSA was the National American Woman Suffrage Association. This was an American organization created in 1890 by the merge of two women's organizations, the National Woman Suffrage Association and the American Woman Suffrage Association. Three important women that were in these organizations were Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, and Susan B. Anthony. This organization was led by Carrie Chapman Catt. Question number 2. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born on October 26, 1902, in New York, New York. She was an American suffragist, social activist, abolitionist, and leading figure in the early women's rights movement. She held the famous Seneca Falls Convention in July of 1848. During the Civil War, she also fought for abolition of slavery. Number 3. Carrie Chapman Catt was a women's rights activist. During her life, she was part of the NAWSA, but retired to take care of her husband, who was dealing with health problems. When he passed, she became involved in women's rights again and became president of the NAWSA. She created an idea that would be called the Winning Plan, which was to focus on solving women's suffrage and passing a federal amendment. She also established the League of Women Voters. The 19th Amendment was soon passed in 1920. Question number 4. Susan B. Anthony was born on February 15, 1820, in Adams, Massachusetts. Her family was a very political family, and she grew up knowing that slaves were good people, as her parents were in the abolitionist movement. While campaigning for alcohol, she decided she wanted women's rights and wanted to speak for it. She realized that no one would take a woman running in politics seriously if they couldn't even vote. Susan B. Anthony founded the NWSA, or National Woman Suffrage Association, in 1869. She went all over the country, speaking to women to stand up for the right to vote, and even voted for president illegally in 1872 and was arrested for this. It took 14 years after her death in 1920 for the 19th Amendment to be released, allowing women to vote. Question number 5. The 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, and this amendment gave women suffrage, or the right to vote. This amendment was part of the Progressive Era, where 3 other amendments were passed earlier. For 140 years, women were not allowed to vote at all for their political leaders. This amendment was accomplished because of the NAWSA. The National Organization of Women was founded in 1966 by Betty Friedan, serving as the first president of NOW. NOW was for abortion rights and won the repeal of the abortion laws in 1969. Question number 7. Betty Friedan went to Smith College and graduated in 1942 with a bachelor's degree. She got married in 1947 and had 3 children. She went to New York to work as a reporter. Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, hit the shelves in 1963. Friedan wrote the book about a discovery of a problem that had formed in society after World War II. The problem was that women in American society should make their role in society just based on maintaining their home, pleasing their husbands, and raising their children. Friedan encouraged women to seek new opportunities for themselves. She did more than just write a book. She co-founded the National Organization for Women, NOW for short, in 1966 and was the first president. Friedan also fought for the abortion rights by establishing the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws in 1969. She wanted women to have a greater role in the political process. Friedan helped create the National Women's Political Caucus in 1971. Betty Friedan died of heart failure on February 4, 2006, in Washington, D.C. She is remembered as one of the leading voices of the feminist and women's rights movement of the 20th century. Question number 8. The Equal Pay Act was passed in 1963. The Equal Pay Act requires that men and women in the same workplace be given equal pay for equal work. All forms of pay are covered by this law, including salary, overtime pay, bonuses, etc. If there is an inequality in wages between men and women, employers may not reduce the wages of either sex to equalize their pay. Question number 9. On June 23, 1972, Nixon signed Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. Title IX is a federal law that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in any federally funded education program or activities. Question number 10. Griswold versus Connecticut. Griswold was an executive director of the Planned Parenthood League of Connecticut. Griswold and the medical director for the league gave instructions, information, and other medical advice. He gave it to married couples concerning about birth control. Griswold and her colleague were convicted under Connecticut law, which criminalized the provision of counseling and other medical treatment to married persons for purposes of preventing conception. Number 11. Roe versus Wade. Roe was a Texas resident who sought to terminate her pregnancy by abortion. Texas had a law that prohibited abortions except to save the pregnant woman's life. After granted certiorari, the court heard arguments twice. The first time, Roe's attorney, Sarah Weddington, could not locate the constitutional hook of her argument for Justice Potter Stewart. Her opponent, Jay Floyd, misfired from the start. Weddington attacked with her constitutional argument in the second round. Her new opponent, Robert Flowers, came under strong questioning from Justice Potter Stewart and Thurgood Marshall. Question number 12. Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA for short, was an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that guarantees equal rights for women. The ERA was originally written by Alice Paul and Crystal Eastman. In 1923, it was introduced in the Congress for the first time. The ERA has always been highly controversial regarding the meaning of equality for women. It was feminist against feminist, says historian Judith Seelander. The result was the eventual defeat of the ERA. Middle-class women generally were supported. Those speaking for the working class were strongly opposed, arguing that employed women needed special protections regarding working conditions and hours. In 1972, it passed both houses of Congress and was submitted to the state legislatures for ratification. It seemed headed for quick approval until Phyllis Schley mobilized conservative women in opposition, arguing that the ERA would disadvantage housewives. Question number 13. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act, or PDA, was an act that passed in 1978 as the amendment to the 7th of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act prohibited the discrimination of sexes including women during pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions. This act also prevents an employer from not hiring a pregnant woman, giving raises, and also laying off of or firing a woman because of being pregnant. Question number 14. Sandra Day O'Connor was born on March 26, 1930 in El Paso, Texas. O'Connor went to the university's law school after receiving her bachelor's in economics at Stanford University. At the time, it was difficult for women to get a job in this area. However, she found a job without pay at the County Attorney of California's San Mateo region. In 1974, O'Connor decided to run for the position as a judge in Maricopa County Superior Court and won. 2 years after she was appointed as the State Courts of Appeals in 1979, President Reagan nominated O'Connor to be the Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, to which she became the first female justice on the Supreme Court. As a member, she was a moderate conservative and often voted with the Republican platform. During her career, in 1988, O'Connor discovered she had breast cancer and underwent mastectomy. This, however, was not reason for her retirement, but for her husband's decline of health. She is currently alive and is living in Phoenix, Arizona. Question number 15. The Civil Rights Act of 1991, which was signed by President George H.W. Bush on November 21, 1991, is a combination of the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and 1964. This act was passed to illegalize discrimination of sex, race, and religion in jobs. Before, jury trials only occurred under the EPA or the ADEA, but with the 1991 Act, jury trials could now be obtained with lawsuits involving intentional discrimination.